So one of the more common kind of issues I see in the psychedelic community, especially in the plant medicine side of things, is people who get really confused about the difference between intuition, actual perception of intuitive information that is accurate, versus projection. Okay, this is a real problem you see a lot in the kind of new age, woo-woo side, the spiritual side of this community. And I want to discuss in this video bottom-up processing in general and the complications with this and how we can kind of solve this riddle of sorting out what's what when it comes to bottom-up information. So if that interests you at all, and I really hope it does, because if you're doing this work, surely you are starting to access more kind of felt sense intuitive information. So this becomes relevant to all of us if we're actually doing this work. So if that's you, please join me for the conversation. So let's just start by defining what bottom-up processing is for those of you who kind of may not be familiar, may not know what I'm talking about here. So there are different schools of thought on how to access and process information in the nervous system. So in different schools of therapy, we have what's called top-down, which is essentially where we are going from our cognitive mind, our intellectual, rational, logical, computing mind, if you will. So this would be the linguistic mind, this would be the linear mind, this would be the logical, rational mind that we all think is who we are, right? And going from that down into the felt sense, down into the feeling, down into controlling the body and the responses and the feelings, right? That's top-down work. The other type of work, which is very common in psychedelic work, is bottom-up work. So bottom-up work is essentially where we are working with the felt sense first, the feelings, the senses, the impressions, and we are kind of tracking that, being mindful with that, and working with that as that emerges into conscious cognitive awareness and clear cognitive frameworks and mental understandings, right? So bottom up, right? So these are two very common ways that people work with the nervous system. And if you're someone who's used psychedelics at all, surely you've had more than a couple bottom-up experiences where something kind of bubbled up as a felt sense or a feeling or an intuition or the beginning of an emotion, then unfolded its way through your nervous system into an understanding, right? Now, there's a lot I want to say about this because, again, this starts to become problematic really quickly, both if you're doing therapeutic work or if you're kind of a spiritual person doing spiritual work and you've kind of discovered your own internal guidance system and your own intuitive faculties, or whether we're talking about understanding and making sense of a psychedelic experience. So I want to start to unpack this with you here in this video and explain to you kind of the different types of bottom-up information, right? And why this is a problem and what I think the real answer and solution here is, which is probably not what you're expecting. So if you're either, again, a high vibrational spiritual person who works with their intuition a lot, or whether you're someone who is trying to do therapeutic work and figure out what's real and what isn't, or someone who just did psychedelic therapy and again is trying to figure out what is real and what wasn't, join me. And I know I said that before in the intro, but join me and let's dive into this and look at it from a couple different angles here, because this is very fertile territory for growth and for healing if we use it right. But if we don't, it really can trip people up. And this is where I see a lot of people getting kind of messed up in their own kind of spiritual progress, in their own psychological progress. So let's unpack it a bit. And I think the place to start here is let's talk about the different types of experiences that come bottom up. Because, the thing is, there are a lot of different types of bottom-up data, right? So let's talk about what some of those are commonly. Okay, so some of the more common ways that we get bottom-up information, and let me explain the problem, and then we'll explain some of the different types of data here. So the real problem that I want to convey to you in this video is that all bottom-up information, there's a lot of different types from accurate to full imagination and everything in between. There is a wide scope of data that comes to us from the bottom up, from the felt sense into the conscious mind, and it all comes through the same channel. And this is the real problem, is that it's hard to parse out what's what, because it could be inaccurate or partially accurate or accurate information that we're perceiving through the felt sense into the conscious cognitive mind. But since it's all coming through the same channel, whatever our belief system is about that bottom up process of coming from the unconscious to the conscious or the felt sense to the cognitive, whatever our belief about that is, or whatever our impression of that is, can really distort the way we relate to the data that comes up, rather than us just cleanly sifting through the data, right? So this can be a real problem, right? So the way that this plays out a lot that I see, for example, is people who are kind of new in their spiritual growth journey and their psychonaut journey, especially people who do plant medicine work like ayahuasca, which can really reveal a lot of kind of information that is in the unconscious or is kind of hidden in the field that we're not normally accessing, however you want to think of that. And then, people discover, oh, I have intuition. Oh, it's often correct. Oh, there is all this other stuff happening on a subtle level. And then it becomes a culture that you see, especially with New Age people, but, not just New Age people, of reacting to these intuitive impressions as if they're always accurate, true, and correct. But the problem here is that a lot of times these intuitive perceptions are not accurate, true, and correct. They are actually not intuitive perceptions at all. They're projections, right? So let's list some of the different types of bottom-up phenomena, right? So obviously one I just named there is intuition, right? So intuition, I think, is a very real form of perception. I think it's a real thing. I think there's probably some data to back that up, I would guess. Certainly anecdotally, beyond just kind of the woo-woo, touchy-feely felt sense people in the world, even with like cops and military, they're taught to hone and cultivate their intuition, their gut sense, their gut feeling, because it's often very much correct and conveying something that maybe the surface presentation of a situation doesn't convey, right? So intuition is a real thing. It's part of what spiritual people would call our internal guidance system or inner guidance system, which is also a very real thing. We do have an internal guidance system. We do have an intuition. And for a lot of us in our modern society, we're kind of socialized out of accessing that information. We're taught to be dismissive of it, to ignore it, that it's bullshit, that it's woo, that it's fake, etc. And, particularly I think for men, we are especially socialized out of listening to our intuition. Right. So if you then have a discovery of your intuition and how accurate it can be and how right it can be and how spot on, and there's no way I could have known that rationally or logically, but it was correct, it can be, it's a game changer. It is a new paradigm of being a human being. And it is affirming and connective and beautiful. And it is a profound thing to discover in ourselves. So intuition's there. But there's other pieces that come through this same channel of bottom up, right? Including what I just said a minute ago, which is projection, right? So projections are the way I would think of projection. There are a lot of different, and this is not strictly projection in the Freudian sense, right? Not completely, or the Jungian sense. But I would think of projection as our brain or our nervous system's autofill feature, right? So our brain is constantly making guesses about reality around us so that it can kind of suss out what's safe and what's not safe, right? So we project, we autofill guesses of what we think is going on around us, what we think is going to happen, what we think someone's intentions are, what we think someone's underlying motivations are or underlying character is, etc. Blah, 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 blah. We project guesses about everything all the time, right? This is one of the things that the brain does, right? It's a feature, not a bug, but it has problems that comes with it, right? And so this is also often an unconscious process, a bottom-up process. And so we end up projecting, and projecting is essentially automatic meaning making. Again, it's this autofill feature of the brain. And that can very much feel like knowing, right? But that doesn't mean that I know, right? A lot of times, and you can vet this by looking at and getting rational, getting logical, getting top down for a moment with these kind of, I know this is how it is kind of things, and really question them and really see, do I really know? Do I really, really know? Or do I think I know? Do I feel like I know? right? And again, this gets confusing juxtaposed against intuition, which is also, I feel that I know, and then it turns out it was correct, right? So maybe a more rational materialist might look at both of these and be like, both of these are the auto guessing feature. It's just that when it's correct, we call it intuition. When it's incorrect, we call it projection. Maybe so, maybe not. I'm open to that conversation. But for simplicity's sake, let's say that there is a form of projection. And projection not only involves like this kind of autofill guessing, but I think it also involves, um, bias, or the more classic sense of projection, which is projective identification, where we are actually not owning things that we're doing, but instead saying other people are doing those things, right? Where we're saying the world out there is doing something that we're doing, et cetera, right? So there are different forms of projection. I get that. But roughly speaking, we look at projection as this kind of automatic meaning making that's unsubstantiated, that is kind of driven by guessing, driven by often bias and emotion. And I think that for me, this is one of the clues between the two, is that often intuition, there's like a neutrality. There's like you're just being present, and then suddenly you get a sense of something, versus projection, where often it's a more of a loaded situation that we're entering into or engaging with that's causing us to generate this meaning. So that's one clue. But we've got intuition, we've got projection, right? We've also got somatic sensations, right? So this can be communications from the body of emotions, feelings, content that it wants to heal or process, right? This could also be, this could also get into really the realm of health, right? Sometimes part of what we're feeling bottom up isn't actually a psychological thing at all. It's your body is, feeling a bit off. Maybe you ate some food and it's not sitting quite right, and that's making you feel a bit more uncomfortable and emotional. It's not enough to like really make, be like a real problem, but it's just kind of subtly kind of letting you to feel a certain way, right? Other bottom-up processes include emotions or accessing memories, right? So something could be a memory that's being stirred up, but it's being, misunderstood or misrecognized, right? Or an emotion that's being stirred up that's not loud, that's not obvious, but it's an emotion. It's yours. It's not the world's. It's not someone else's. It's yours, right? Et cetera, et cetera. There's a bunch of stuff. There's also, as an artist, I can say that there's an intuitive creative voice that is bottom up also, a drive towards doing, towards creation, right? There's also other kind of guidance promptings that can happen as a bottom. So there's a bunch of stuff. It's all bottom up. It's all coming to the same channel, right? And the problem is really a problem of recognizing and vetting and clearly working with what this data is, right? And so for a lot of people out there, especially if we're not trained to look at our own thinking and be self-aware of ourselves and question our own thoughts and question our own beliefs, and be willing to hold whatever arises in us loosely as perhaps not true or not the whole truth or not accurate, right? There are a lot of people out there who don't have that ability. And so what they end up doing is identifying with everything that comes bottom up, holding onto it really tightly, defending it really tightly, being really aggressive about, well, I know this because I feel this kind of a thing, right? And so it's a real problem. It becomes a real problem. For example, let me give a couple contexts here. So obviously this is a problem, like I was saying, with people who are new to spirituality and have a hard time parsing out what is projection and what is intuition. That's a really common one that I see a lot. It's actually a real problem, okay? Another couple problems, look at my list here. Right, another big one is integration work, right? So let's say you have a really big experience on a psychedelic. You have a big belief that unfolds or impression that unfolds, or like hints at a memory of something traumatic, but you're not sure if it happened or not, right? And then in the integration phase afterwards, you're like, okay, well, what do I do with that? How do I work with that? What is that? right? And so this can create a real problem for integration work because you're like, did I experience that or did I not? Did that really happen? Is that really true? Or is that not? Right? And that can create a lot of complication and unnecessary confusion after a big journey. Okay, another big example here that's like really kind of that same dynamic, but just minus the psychedelics, is if we're doing kind of deep healing therapeutic work. I'll often see people, in sessions when I'm working with them, kind of get into these kind of bottom up, like emergent information experiences. And it's hard for them to parse is this my truth or is this a projection I'm having? Is this a reaction from a part of me that feels a certain way and this is a symbolic communication? Or is this a literal communication of a memory or of an emotional truth I have or something that I truly feel, et cetera, right? It can be really hard to separate that all out, right? And so this is why this is a problem. This is why I'm talking about this, because this bottom up information, this felt sense information is, I think, the fertile territory for expansion and healing and spiritual awakening and personal development as a human being, becoming a more whole, well-rounded human. I think much of this domain of felt sense and bottom up information is what we need to get good with, right? I think this is really important. I think it's also really profound and beautiful and rewarding. Uh, but also at the same time, people who are unskillful with it can create some real problems, right? Um, for example, it's, just personal anecdote. I find it incredibly uncomfortable to be around people who have done a lot of ayahuasca work and are hyper reactive to everything around them because they're constantly projecting and reacting to this bottom up sense because they can't parse intuition from perception. Right. That's really hard to be around because then these people get really reactive and sensitive and hot, cold, and yes, no. And, it's weird, frankly. So this can be a real problem, both for you and for those around you. Right. And so there's this question, how do we work with bottom up information skillfully? So let's talk about that for a moment and then we'll wrap the video. So, in my opinion, based on my training and based on, all the examples I have of real life work with my clients, there is a way to work with bottom up material skillfully that makes the room for us to discover what is accurate, what is true, what is an emotional communication, what is a projection, and start to sort this out. And really, what it boils down to is dealing with that information by holding it loosely and kind of being agnostic about it. In other words, not having a firm conviction about it at first, but simply following it and attuning to it and allowing it to unpack and unfold itself. Right. So this is very much a huge part of what I'm teaching in the Secure Self-Relating course that I'll be launching very soon, which, by the way, if you're interested, there will be a link down below. You'll see right in the description of this video, a link to go sign up for the waitlist. It will be launching shortly. If you get on the waitlist, you're going to have an opportunity to get it at a pre-sale price for cheaper, which I would encourage you to do. It's going to be truly life-changing material and so worth, getting at a discount. So sign up for the pre-sale. I will let you know via email as soon as it's available. I'm going to let people on the email list know before I publicly launch it. So if you want in on it first, go sign up down below. It'll be worth it. I promise you. Anyways, in the secure self-relating stuff that I'm teaching and doing with people, this is a huge part of what we're doing actually, is attuning to this bottom-up information and holding a space with it where we are not getting into certainty right away. We're not getting into reacting from the information that's coming up right away, but we're staying open and curious with that information. And we're kind of interacting with that information in a certain way that allows more of that information to unfold itself completely until we have real clarity. Okay. Now, when we do this, we kind of make the room for discovery. Right. And we can kind of vet and unfold and allow without judgment, without reactivity, without running away with this information, without projecting out on others or ourselves or our past or our future or whatever. And instead, we can really let our nervous system clarify for us and tell us what it's feeling, what it's saying, why it's saying that. And what I find over and over and over is if we slow down and we get skillful and curious and hold that in a loose light that's not driven by, say, vigilance and fear and anxiety, or driven by neediness, or driven by avoidance, but instead we're simply present with this information as it unfolds, and we make the room for it to unfold. What we end up finding is that uh, the clarity comes. And when the clarity comes, what I find over and over with myself, I've had this experience so many times, but also my clients over and over and over see that when the clarity comes, it's real clarity that hits at multiple levels of your being and makes so much sense, it's hard to ignore. Okay. So to me, that's real clarity. Real clarity isn't like, oh, I know because I feel. Real clarity is I felt, I listened, I allowed, and as it all emerged, I was able to really clearly, consciously understand, what it is, the signal, what the signal was telling me, whether it was accurate or not, or whether this was just an emotional thing that needed support or process, whether it was a memory or projection. And here's the cool thing about being agnostic about all this stuff is if we're agnostic with it and we just follow it and listen and work with it, we can bring ourselves to a regulated, centered, sane, healthy, clear place with it, no matter what type of content is coming bottom up. Right. So whether it is, again, a projection or an intuition, whether it is an emotion or a memory or like an idea, right? If I can be frank with you, a lot of my best ideas, my most powerful insights, my guidance about what to do with my life or things I want to create, a lot of these come as felt sense first, come as bottom up inklings, right? And I'm sure, again, if you're doing psychedelics, or you're doing meditation, or you're doing spiritual work, you have these moments of feeling first. And then if you stay with that feeling, it kind of unfolds itself and you get clarity on the tail end of that. So the way to deal with this isn't to try to figure it out ahead of time, because I do think you can get better at parsing which is which, but I don't think it's ever going to be 100%. I think our mind is so tricky and complicated. It's easy for us to, for example, really think we have an intuition and know the difference between intuition and projection, but it turns out to be a projection, right? That happens even for people who are highly skilled with themselves, right? Or the other way around. Sometimes someone really thinks, oh, this is just a memory or some gobbledygook, but there's actually a real important thing there. There's a real clear, practical understanding or thing there, et cetera, right? And so this is the art of working with ourselves. And again, if we approach that from an open-ended, relaxed, curious, attuning, allowing, making the room to discover what this is without attachment or kind of repulsion to the message that's coming up, invariably, I find that it's productive and useful and works out for the best. So that's my thoughts on this topic. This is a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a while, but I would love to know, what do you think about this? Does this resonate for you? Is this useful? Are you one of those people who kind of runs away with your projections, confusing them for intuitions? Are you someone who lives from intuition a lot? How's it going for you? Leave a comment down below. I'd really love to hear your guys' thoughts about this, because again, like many of the topics I talk about here on the channel, this is one of these things I don't see anyone on YouTube really talking about, or much in the kind of psychedelic space, the new age space. Working with intuition is a huge topic, and yet very few people talk about it. So anyways, let's wrap for now. More content on the way soon. Much love to you. Hope you're well. Take care.